Welcome. In the years leading up to the Revolutionary War, among the many injuries increasing America's discontent, Thomas Jefferson had a particular beef. European naturalists were disparaging the wildlife of the New World as small, unimpressive, and even degenerate compared to the beasts of the old country. Jefferson's pride in the virility of the American landscape and its natural wonders was bolstered by the discovery of the American incognitum, a giant fossilized tooth that was determined to be some variety of giant elephantine creature, which we now know as Mammoth americanum, or the American mastodon. In addition to its contribution to the fate of the reputation of America's fauna, the mastodon was a critical shaper of the American landscape during its time on Earth. Mammoths and mastodons diverged more than 20 million years ago, and by the late Pliocene epoch, mastodons were thick on the ground in Eurasia. By the ensuing Pleistocene, they had crossed the Siberian land bridge and populated North America. And whereas the woolly mammoth underwent much of its evolution in the Arctic, the mastodon occupied continental North America, eventually evolving into the American mastodon. And despite the success of the lineage, the mastodon never crossed back into the Old World. Like mammoths, mastodons also had thick coats of shaggy hair to protect them from the intense cold of the Pleistocene North American landscape. Their fossils are found across North America, but have a concentrated occurrence in the south of the Great Lakes, where coniferous forests, bogs, and marshes characterize the late Pleistocene environment. Where mammoths were grazers, mastodons were primarily browsers, nibbling on the shrubs and the low-lying branches of trees. Now, around 11,000 years ago, toward the end of the last glacial period, mastodons went extinct. Theories about their demise include climate change, increased competition for accustomed food sources, possibly hunting, though this is debated, and it is also postulated that tuberculosis was rampant in the population and may have played a role in its extinction. But what is not debated is that the mastodon would have had an outsized role in shaping the ecology of the intercontinental American landscape, opening forests to create grasslands. All species that have a strong influence on their ecosystems in general, stronger than expected by their abundance or biomass, are often called keystone species. And it is with this bit of history that we meet today's guest, Peter Allen of Mastodon Valley Farm in Wisconsin. Peter studied ecology and was particularly inspired by restoration ecology and the idea of humans as keystone species. Peter and his wife Maureen left academia to homestead in 2012, and their journey has rivaled that of the eponymous incognitum that they named their farm after. Let's get into our chat with Peter after a word from our sponsors.
Today's episode of the No-Till Market Garden Podcast is brought to you by Farmhand. I don't know about you, but I got into farming to grow food, not spend my time creating pack lists, writing newsletters, responding to emails, or maintaining web stores. If I could spend less time on my phone and computer and more time farming, that would be a win. Enter Farmhand. Farmhand is the only all-in-one virtual assistant built by and for CSA farmers. It takes care of the admin, managing orders, customer communications, and automating tedious tasks so you can get back to doing what you love. On average, Farmhand saves CSA farmers 6 hours a week. That's 6 hours you could spend with your family, out in the field, or simply taking a breather. So, what would you do with an extra 6 hours? Now's the time to get your systems ready for next season. Learn how Farmhand can help at farmhand.partners/no-till. Today's episode is also brought to you by ASAP, Appalachian Sustainable Agriculture Project. ASAP, Appalachian Sustainable Agriculture Project, will offer the Business of Farming Conference on Saturday, February 22nd in Asheville, North Carolina. This annual conference brings together professional and aspiring farmers from across the Southeast to network and share resources to build viable farm businesses. Scholarships for BIPOC and limited resource farmers are available, as well as discounts for farm partners registering together. Registration opens in mid-November. Find out more at asapconnections.org. That's asapconnections.org. All right, enjoy the show.
Peter, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, my pleasure.
It's really lovely to meet you. I've heard really nice things about you, and I think my friend who suggested I reach out to you saw you speak at a conference. So I think it'll be really exciting to share you with the listeners. If you don't mind, let's get a little bit into your background. Start with you and where you came from, how you got interested in farming, and kind of a little bit about the journey that took you to what you're doing now.
Sure. So maybe I'll just start by saying what I'm doing now, and then give a little story to the background. So we have a regenerative farm in southwest Wisconsin, Mastodon Valley Farm, and we produce grass-fed beef, pastured pork, poultry, lamb. We raise goats and other critters in a way to restore the historic native ecosystems here. And we've been doing it for about 12 years. I built a house, and we have a family, and we homeschool our kids, and we grow all our own food and all that kind of stuff. So we're also doing the homestead thing. And how we got started, I had never had any intention or even idea about agriculture, farming, homesteading, any of that stuff. I don't have any agriculture in my family. It wasn't on my career track. I was ready to be a professor. I had done academic work at the University of Wisconsin, master's and PhD, doing research on restoration ecology and how do we restore ecosystems, functional ecosystems that provide the services that we need for human beings, like building soil and cleaning water and biodiversity and having clean air and all that kind of stuff, which our ecosystems aren't doing anymore. And so I'm really trying to figure out how can we restore ecosystems at scale. And I was involved in various restoration projects through the university and through other sources in the Midwest, and was really disappointed in the approaches. They tended to be very singularly focused on species composition. So you'd go out to a site, you'd identify invasive species, and you'd use hand-to-hand combat and chemical warfare to try to eliminate those species, and then you'd bring in some native species. And that was the extent of what we called ecological restoration. It actually ignored the ecosystem altogether. It just it was kind of a form of gardening. And because of that, it was only really available to institutions, wealthy landowners, somebody who could spend a lot of money to just change the plants in a place temporarily. And it didn't cause any systemic changes. The actual ecosystem functioning didn't often increase very much in the long term as a result of really expensive work and time-consuming work. And so in my dissertation, I was looking at trying to figure out, well, how can we restore these oak savannas here I'm in the upper Midwest in Wisconsin, but much of North America was covered in a savanna type ecology. A savanna is a grassland, so it's continuous cover of grasses with scattered trees. So much of the Northeast and the Southeast, the Midwest, and the West Coast, all the way up, California was oak savanna, different species of oaks in different places, different species of trees and shrubs and plants and grasses. But the form of sort of grassland with trees was very common across North America. And I was trying to figure out why it was that way. Because if you take a piece of land now in the modern context and let it go, an old farm field or woods or whatever, you just don't manage it at all. You let it go. In the eastern United States, we get a lot of rain. We're not the Great Plains, even here in the Midwest. And we get forests. We get big, dense forests. We don't get savannas. It's not something that just naturally occurs. And so I was really trying to figure out why were there savannas everywhere, and how can we restore them? Because the cool thing about savannas is because they're grassland, they support herbivores. They actually have the highest levels of biodiversity and the highest ecologic productivity of any ecosystem within these climates of the Midwest, Eastern United States. And what I realized looking through archaeology and anthropology and various disciplines was that Native Americans created these savannas on purpose to produce food, because they are the number one food producing ecosystem we can have here. And so most of North America, it was under an agricultural management regime, and had been transformed from what it would have otherwise been without humans here to something very, very different in the presence of those humans. And when the first settlers came, we didn't recognize that as being agricultural because it didn't have straight lines and hedgerows and plowed fields. So we saw it as being natural, but it was very, very much not natural. It was very artificial. So anyway, basically, I realized that the only way we could transform our landscapes and restore the ecological functioning of our landscapes is to do it in a way that is profitable, that makes money. There has to be some kind of economic incentive, or else I didn't really see a way of it scaling. And so in my dissertation, I basically created a model for a farm based on the ecological functioning of the oak savanna ecosystem. And then afterwards, I was kind of in a position where I had to decide what I'm going to do with my career. And I could have gone on to be a professor and write books about this kind of stuff and tell farmers what they should do. But I had seen other professors that I'd worked with and other people in the academy that do that for a living. And to me, it didn't seem like they got much traction. Like nobody was reading their papers, nobody's reading their books. It's not making big changes on the landscape. And because I didn't see anybody else doing it that way, I thought, well, I should just go do it and see if it works. And if it works, then maybe I'll write a book about it from the vantage point of having, a decade or so of experience. And so that's what I did. I quit my academic job and we bought a piece of land out here in Southwest Wisconsin. And we've been here ever since.
So tell us now about Mastodon Valley Farm. How big is it? What does it look like? Where does the name come from? And then how did you set it up? And how long did it take you to do that?
So we are on 225 acres in an area called the Driftless region, which is mostly the southwestern corner of Wisconsin, is an area that for some reason nobody really knows. During the ice ages, the glaciers went around. So they came down from the north, they split on both sides of us, went down on both sides, and actually rejoined south of us in Illinois and all the way down Illinois and scraped everything flat. But because they didn't come here, we didn't get scraped flat. So we actually have a very ancient landscape. I'm right on the Kickapoo River, which is considered one of the oldest rivers and watersheds in the world. We have really steep hills. They're not mountains. We've got 300 to 400 feet elevation difference between the ridge tops and the valleys, but they're very steep hills. It's an erosive landscape with full of springs and trout streams. The people come all over to trout fish in our streams. We have a class 1 trout stream flows right through our property. We actually just had an otter.
Oh, cool.
Me and the kids were watching at breakfast an otter sliding on the ice on our spring pond.
They're the coolest.
It was really fun. So we have a landscape with a lot of water. There's springs everywhere. So that's sort of the area that we're in. I fell in love with this area the first time I came and visited and knew I wanted to be here. And so we found a way to make it happen. Our land itself is very diverse. We have ridgetop, lots of really steep hillsides. We have valley bottoms. We have springs and trout streams. We have about half of our property is very wooded and steep woods. Like you can't drive a vehicle on it. It's too steep. And then the other half is open, mostly pastures. We do have a couple crop fields that we converted back to tall grass prairie that we manage both for grazing and for hay production. We've planted, 10,000 trees around. We're in a situation where, so the definition of a savanna, technically, if you were to Google what is a savanna, the scientific journal or book is going to tell you somewhere around 50% canopy covered, trees, and then the rest open. And our farm, when you look at it from space and an aerial, or 225 acres, we're 50% canopy cover, 50% open. The problem is that it's split. So we have half of it is solid forest, no savanna. The other half is solid open pasture, no trees. So we've been in a process of clearing trees in the woods to open it up, let more light in, get forage to grow, to hold the soils and build soil, and increase the diversity in those places. And then adding trees to the open areas to bring in, have more habitat, shade, which can help the grasses, and have various other benefits to having, there's lots of benefits to having trees in open areas, and there's lots of benefits to opening up closed forested areas. And so we're on really difficult terrain to do that. So it's kind of a slow, lifelong process. I'll be probably doing it for the rest of my life. But it's something I really enjoy. And yeah, so how long did it take us to set up? We were fortunate in that the pastures on the farm when we bought it were being conventionally grazed. So at least there were fences. And because of the way the creeks run through the land, there's lots of water access. So we basically, I spent a lot of time building fences, and we subdivided, these large tracts of pasture into smaller, 1 to 2 acre paddock size paddocks that we can then, we rotate our cattle. They spend about 1 day in each paddock. And so we have, 40, 50 paddocks laid out across our valleys and hillsides. And then, we planted a lot of trees, and we bought vacant land. I didn't have a house here. So my wife and I, when we first got here, didn't have any children yet. So we lived in a tent while I built a yurt, and then we lived in the yurt while I built a cabin. Then we had a couple kids in the cabin. Then I started building a house, all out of the trees on our land. And actually, we just moved into the house just a couple months ago, and our 4th kid is due in a couple weeks.
Oh, congratulations. That's amazing.
Yeah, thanks.
That's really great. So, boy, there's a lot there. But just to kind of keep myself on track, this philosophy, this methodology that you have, is really, it really digs into what it means to be sort of a cultural landscape, a culturally managed landscape. And you talk about being a keystone species of that ecosystem. And I think it would be helpful for you to talk about what that means to you, because it isn't, I think it doesn't align necessarily with what I think a lot of people would think of as pristine ecosystems, because I think people assume that humans don't belong or, because we're messing things up so badly, that, the best ecosystems are the ones that are where humans are locked out of them. And this is something that I talk about a lot. And I'd love it if you would share your philosophy of that and how you've been inspired to really try to change the way humans interact with the landscape.
Yeah, I do. I think that is one of the most necessary paradigm shifts we need to make as humans, is to stop thinking of ourselves as the most destructive force on Earth that needs to be quarantined inside some little cage somewhere and not allowed to interact with the landscape, and instead think of ourselves as necessary to the ecological function of our planet, which we actually are to the highest degree. The planet can't function to its highest ecological potential right now without human beings helping it. And that's something we all need to not only realize intellectually, but like embody in our heart and soul. It's like it's a really deep change that needs to take place. I'm going to back up to answer this question, to answer a question I realized you asked before that I didn't get to, which is, why are we called Mastodon Valley Farm? And so I mentioned about Native Americans and how they had shaped the land into these savanna ecosystems that were highly productive, that grew the food they need, fruits and nuts on the trees, and herbivores for meat. And the really fascinating piece of the puzzle, ecologically, at least for me, was learning that in North America, we had savannas here prior to humans for 20 million years. Because now, since the last 12,000 years, since there's been a lot of people here, the only way to have savannas is with people. You can't have them without people. It doesn't just naturally occur. But prior to 12,000 years ago, and the widespread presence of human beings on this continent, we had the widespread presence of megafauna. For 20 to 30 million years, we had huge animals, including the mastodon. The mastodon was the biggest of those. Well, the woolly mammoth was actually bigger from a body size perspective, but they were grazers that lived way up Canada. They were up like tundra kind of grasslands. They came down into the continental U.S., but the northern states. The mastodons were all over North America, everywhere, and they were not grazers. They did not eat grass. They did not graze grass. I'm sure they grazed a little bit. All herbivores, like a little bit of everything, but their primary diet was trees. They were browsers. So large elephants that spent their time knocking trees down and ripping the leaves off of them. And so when we have this forested ecological context where if we let the land go, it turns into forest. Well, if you have these huge animals, we also had ground sloths, huge sloths that could reach in a sitting position 15, 20 feet up into the canopy and eat leaves of trees. That's all they ate was leaves of trees. We had camels that ate the leaves of trees. We had horses that ate the leaves of trees. We had beavers the size of Volkswagen bugs that ate the leaves of trees. So we have these massive animals that their entire diet was trees. And so when you really think about that from an ecological perspective, our whole baseline of understanding about how nature works changes. Like we have our current context, we can't understand how the plants that are around us evolved if we don't consider the fact that they have been with these large mammals for 20 million years and only without them for the last 12,000, just a blink in their time span as a species. And so we have to understand how the megafauna worked in order to understand how ecosystems worked. And so how ecosystems used to work was that we had these large herbivores that cleared out woods that wouldn't let a forest go through full succession to a climax forest. It would turn into an open patchwork of some woods, some grass. And then once the grass is in there, that attracts the grazing animals like the buffalo and some horse species and other grazing animals. And so what you had was a really diverse set of ecosystem processes that were driven by these huge herbivores, specifically the mastodon as being sort of the keystone species of most of North America for approximately 20 million years that kept it from turning into forest, that kept it more open. And then, they all went away 12,000 years ago. They disappeared all approximately at the same time. And then all of a sudden you have humans on the scene, and they end up after a few thousand years starting to burn the grasses and burn the understory of the forest and open things up. Because when you burn grass, the green grass that grows with the minerals from the ashes is much sweeter and better tasting and more nutritious. And so you could actually do a form of rotational grazing by patch burning grassland ecosystems. You could predict the movement of large herds of herbivores like buffalo. And so Native Americans were able to do that over large scales, over long time frames. For the last 6,000 to 8,000 years, they were clearing out woods, making more open savannas in order to produce more food. And so they were the keystone species. Humans were keystone species here on this continent for 12,000 years. We've had humans as keystone species for 12,000 years here. And then enter the Europeans, which turned everything into an agricultural landscape, which in the early days wasn't too far off. They planted orchards, they kept the trees on the fence rows. It was only after World War II that things got really crazy and we started cutting everything down and expanding, taking out the old fence rows, taking out the hedgerows, and just plowing everything. And biodiversity went away, and all these ecosystem services that we used to have on the fringes of our farm fields. They may not have been the most sustainable farms, but we still had relatively functioning ecosystems at sort of the landscape scale. That all went away. And so now we're at this point where we've lost this inherited ecological capital. We've squandered it. And the only way to rebuild it back for future generations is to not pawn the responsibility for that off on corporations or governments or anything. It's to actually embrace that role of a keystone species here and now to whatever capacity we can. And People will tell me when I say this, like, well, I don't own any land. I can't be a Keystone species. I can't manage 100 acres like you can. And it's like, well, how many meals do you eat in a day? Well, they'll say 3. I was like, well, do you eat at 3 meals every single day of the year? It's like, well, yeah. Okay. How long do you plan to be alive? Okay. 80, 90 years. Okay. So in the process of your lifespan, you are going to 100% dictate the management of, depending on your diet, between 40 and 100 acres of land. So actually, in your lifespan, you are a Keystone species, even if you sit in an apartment building in New York City for your entire life. You are dictating the land management of 40 to 100 acres of real world land in a real place based on your food decisions, 3 meals a day, 365 days a year. And so we all have a responsibility, one way or another, to change the land, to restore functional ecosystems everywhere on planet Earth. And it'll take a lot of us that sort of realize that and embark in that mission to pull it off.
So when did you begin the sort of sharing of what you're trying to accomplish? Because obviously in the early years, I mean, I don't know, did you start everything at once, or did you start your CSA at once? How did that evolution kind of go for you?
Yeah, we sort of started everything all at once. I realized right away that in order to make enough money on the land to make it worthwhile, I couldn't do that selling to the co-op, doing any kind of wholesale sales. And I also, I live in a very rural area. Farmers markets just aren't going to cut it. So immediately we started and the other thing is too that a lot of the potential customers of ours weren't people that had a chest freezer. They weren't interested in buying a quarter or a half. They just had whatever freezer space they had available in their refrigerator at home. And so what we put together was mixed meat bundles. So bundling beef, pork, and chicken, and however people want it, into small bundles that can fit in people's freezers, around 12 pounds. And then selling that as a subscription product. That's what we call our meat CSA. It's not a conventional CSA in that we don't have people pay up front. It's just a monthly subscription like any other subscription. And your credit card gets automatically charged once a month. And once a month, we get meat to you one way or another. And so now we're shipping nationwide. In the early days, we were just delivering it to Madison, Wisconsin, or Minneapolis, or wherever we could sell it. So we started that right away. And then I was in the university, and one of my favorite parts of being in the university was teaching. I mean, I taught every single year I taught for 10 years, both undergraduate and graduate level courses on ecology, complex systems theory, modeling. And I loved that part of my job, and I didn't want to stop. And so right away, we started teaching courses on the farm. And I had, I was into the permaculture. And so we were teaching permaculture design classes. Now we call it a regenerative design class because we've kind of evolved out of the permaculture curriculum a little bit. And so, we teach these courses both online and in person, where we're helping people do that at their own property on whatever scale that is, whether it's a homestead or a big farm. And so, we kind of have done everything from the beginning.
And how did your customers find you, or how did you find your customers? Was it word of mouth, or are you engaged in any kind of active marketing, or, how did that all, because shipping nationwide, that's no small, especially meat, something perishable. That's a major undertaking.
Yeah. And we've only been doing that for the last couple of years. I think, it's been really word of mouth. We haven't done much. In the early days, we would make little, flyers and post them up at the local co-ops and whatnot. And I don't know how much that helped or not, but we just kind of grew slow, which we needed to, because we had to build our capacity. We had to build up a cattle herd. We had to, build up our infrastructure to be able to run, lots of animals in order to grow enough meat. And so it was definitely sort of a iterative process, but yeah, I mean, it works.
Yeah, I mean, it must. If you have a nationwide audience now, that's pretty impressive. I mean, one of my main curiosities with a meat CSA is how do you manage the entire carcass? Do people get what they get and they don't throw a fit, or do they say what they want, or how are you managing that part of it?
Yeah, customers are like kids, right? You
Yeah,
get what you get.
I'm
You don't throw
sorry,
a fit.
I only want this pretty piece, no bones.
No, I mean it actually it just works out. I don't really have to do a lot of crazy inventory management. Like basically we tell our customers like each month you're gonna get, 3 or 4 pounds of ground beef, beef or pork roast, beef or pork steaks, and some bacon and bratwurst or breakfast sausage. And then if people, I've got customers have all kinds of custom specifications like, well, we don't want any processed food, so no bacon, bratwurst, or sausage. Okay, that's easy. Some people are no pork and beef and chicken. Some people are no chicken, only beef and pork. I mean, we can accommodate anybody, and it all just works out. Like the whole carcass gets utilized. One thing I do is I just give organ meats away to anybody to any of our customers that want it. I'll just, just let me know. One thing I do is, so we have like this monthly bundle that goes out, but then before I send out every bundle, I send customers a form with add-ons. They can a la carte add anything else that they want. Cause we also do things like beef sticks and beef jerky and summer sausage and hot dogs, stuff that I'm not going to put in a bundle, but if they want to like add it on as extra, we can do that. And so then I just have, organs as free. And then it's just as a kind of a perk to being a part of our CSA. You get free organ meats if you want them. And so we have a dozen or two customers that get a liver every month or whatever. And so the whole carcass ends up getting utilized one way or another. Another thing is we use livestock guardian dogs.
Mm-hmm. And they love that stuff. Yeah.
I mean, one thing that's been unfortunate is like, you have meat in a freezer and the freezer dies and you don't catch it for 2 days. And then the meat's not bad, but it's like it thawed out. I'm not going to sell it. Right. So I've got dogs and they will eat that up in a hurry.
Yeah. No, it's one of the best reasons to have big dogs is they're great.
I lost a chest freezer full of brisket. There was like 150 pounds of beef brisket. So
your
my dogs were eating beef brisket like
dogs.
every day. They were getting like 5 pounds of brisket.
Those are some lucky dogs.
Yeah, they're lucky dogs.
Yeah,
for sure.
They're the envy of the neighborhood.
Today's episode of the No-Till Market Garden podcast is brought to you by Ohio Earth Food. If you grow plants, you know that to a farm of any size, your soil is your most steadfast partner, an asset worthy of investing in. Since 1972, Ohio Earth Food has been the go-to source for the highest performing and most cost-effective granular and liquid fertilizers, seed starting soils, foliar sprays, and disease and insect controls, all approved for use on organic farms. They deliver them right to your farm, too. Don't count on luck this year. Start your seeds in their Plant Pro and the Seed Catapult potting soils, and put their ReVita fertilizers in your soil before you plant, and rest assured that your plants will have all the nutrients, stimulants, and energy for whatever comes their way. These natural blends utilize compost, kelp, and humate, and are low salt index safe for high tunnels. Feed your soils and let your soil feed the plants. Visit them at ohioearthfood.com, now with branches in Ohio and Wisconsin. ohioearthfood.com. All right, back to the show.
So how many different animal systems? You said you had, obviously you have cattle, you have pigs, you have chickens.
Yep. The chickens and the pigs, I don't breed them, so I don't have them through the year. I buy piglets in the spring, and I buy, day old chicks that we raise in brooders and then run on in our hay fields during the summer. And so, but for livestock that we keep year round and maintain breeding stock of, that's cows and sheep and goats, which we need. We don't actually market goat meat, but we need them to manage our landscape because we have a lot of brush that would otherwise overtake our pastures. And so we actually need the diversity. The more diversity of herbivores you have on the landscape, the higher diversity of plant species you can maintain, it's a beautiful thing. And so we actually need the diversity of herbivores in order to maintain and control the diversity of plants in our pastures and woods.
And do they all rotate through all of the farm, or because, I could imagine the goats kind of staying in the more wooded areas all the time, but do you move them through the pastures as well, just for parasite control and, diversity of food preferences and all of those things?
The cattle are in the pastures, and then the goats and the sheep are basically like targeted landscape control. So, there's certain places where we have goldenrod that's choking out our grasses. That's where we take sheep. We have places where multiflora rose is choking out pasture, and that's where we take the goats. And sometimes they're together, sometimes they're separate. Sometimes they're with the cows, sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're with the pigs, and sometimes they're not. It just depends on where all the animals are in their rotation at a given piece of time in a place, and then what our management objectives are, and what our infrastructure and labor availability is in that given week or month, as to sort of how best to orchestrate everything. Sometimes we don't do what might be the optimal solution because I just don't have the labor. I don't have the hours in the day to do it. So we do the next best thing. And it's always a very fluid, just trying to do our best possible with the resources and materials we have on hand.
Do you have any employees?
Off and on. I don't have any, full-time employees, but through the season we'll hire people. It's actually been a challenge, is finding good help locally, that is consistent, and it's kind of hard work that most people aren't used to doing for long periods of time, like spending a whole day with a brush, uh, clearing brush, or opening up fence lines, or clearing out fence. There's a lot of work that's it's kind of hard, and our place is very hilly. We don't get cell phone reception, which is kind of hard for a lot of younger people to not be able to be posting on Instagram and whatnot. So there's been some challenges finding good labor here for sure.
When people come and take a workshop from you, are they mostly wanting to do their own homesteading, or are they wanting to get into kind of commercial farming? What would you say the bulk of your courses are taught? Who are they taught to?
It's very variable. I mean, we have a little bit of everything. Most times we have people from other parts of the world. We've had people from Ecuador and from Czechoslovakia and various parts of the world who are doing more commercial farming and trying to be regenerative. We'll have we have a few sort of older folks who may be just retiring and ending their careers and wanting to do something good with their remaining years. And so they buy a bigger piece of land and try to figure out how to do good things on it. And we have a lot of younger people who are either just out of college or trying to decide whether or not to go to college, that are trying to find some kind of pathway into land access and doing this kind of work. So it's a gamut. We'll have we always have a few veterans that come in, and honestly, some of those have turned out to turn into very successful farms. They have a really solid attitude and confidence in their own ability to solve problems and get things done, which is really helpful when you're doing something on your own that's hard and that you've never done before. It's a challenge.
Yeah, no, and a really rewarding way of sort of committing to doing something significant every single day. I mean, I think a lot of veterans find good homes in farming when they leave the service, and I think it's really great to give them those opportunities.
Totally.
So I know a lot of people are going to be wondering this, because you are also homesteading and you have 4 children. You've built several homes, several different iterations of a home. And so talk about how you're managing everything, and how you and your partner, your wife, sort of handle the homeschooling on top of everything. I mean, I'm just personally in awe of anyone who's taking that on, because COVID was my brush with homeschooling, and I don't know if I'm really cut out for it. But it sounds like you're managing a lot. So how do you find balance, and what do you do to make sure that you're keeping everything together?
Like my wife and I, when we first started, we bought vacant land and we didn't have kids, and we were both out there moving fence and sending emails to customers and figuring out how to get it all set up. And then I built a little cabin and we had our first child in there. And pretty quickly it became apparent that my wife wasn't going to be really adding much to the farm anymore, which was fine. But we very early on, and it's kind of interesting because neither one of us come from, very traditional families and whatever, the old way of doing things. We were both fairly progressive in how we were thinking about things. And, but the sort of traditional division of labor, and sort of in a family and household just became the only real way that it worked. And so it very, very early on, we realized that my wife's domain was the house and taking care of the kids. And she grows our vegetables and she milks the cow and she does the domestic duties around the house. And my job was to run the farm and make sure we had money in our bank account. And so it just worked that way. As far as homeschooling, I was homeschooled as a kid. And so I always just assumed I would want to homeschool our kids. Like that was what I wanted to do. And my wife was up for it. I have a lot of confidence in it because I was raised in it. So I could kind of see that it's really, I mean, it doesn't have to be that big of a deal. It can be pretty, like once a kid knows how to read, they can kind of do it themselves. It's more just orchestrating and setting everything up for their success. And so, so my wife was willing to give that a shot. And so we're doing that right now and it's working great. And, I think it all is pretty natural. It all just kind of works out once you kind of, take responsibility for your domain and then go do it.
So along those lines, you were speaking to the difficulty of finding people who can really get into what it means, what it takes to run a farm and show up every day and the kind of work. And, for some of us, that's how we want to live. And it just feels exactly right. But for a lot of people, it is a rude awakening of what it really takes to kind of get the work done. And so what do you say to people, who are like, this is just untenable. It's just an absolute nightmare of never ending tasks, and nobody's going to carry this kind of work into the future. It's just not the way we live anymore. I mean, what do you say to people? Because I get that a lot. It is hard to find people, especially now, who are so removed from any generational farming. And it's a difficult conversation, I find, just what it takes to not just grow grow food commercially, but also just to manage landscapes in a community sense. It shouldn't just be the responsibility of, a tiny fraction of people to bring back these ecosystems. So talk a little bit about, how you think about those things and, how you communicate those thoughts to people.
Well, it's really interesting how you framed that, because you sort of, in my eyes, kind of answered your own question, which is that right now it is on the shoulders of just a few people to manage the landscape. And it's a really difficult job that most people just frankly aren't cut out for. I would say that I wasn't cut out for it either. I had no experience. I mean, I had no carpentry experience and I built a house. I had no farming experience and I built a farm. So it can be done. I think one thing that helped me is I dropped myself into a position where I had no choice but to go forward. Like I didn't give myself like a safety valve. And so, I dropped myself on a piece of land and got my wife pregnant. It was like, okay, we need a roof over our heads. and And
It's gonna get
I had
awfully
enough.
tight.
I had just the right combination of confidence and naivete that I was able to just go build a house. But I think, starting out, it's got to be, a collection of people like me and like us that are out there that take on that responsibility and then just figure out how to do it. But, pushing the clock forward, we do need more people near the land. We need to have more community focused land management. And so that's really complicated and difficult, but that's sort of the solution, right? Because there's not that many people that are going to go out there and do the kind of things that I went out and did. But if there's enough of us to start and to create a nucleus that then a community can form around, then that's how we start to make real lasting change. And so I think that is the solution of creating these nuclei around the country of regenerative land management that's producing. I mean, that's the key. I mean, it's got to be feeding people. Like, we've got to be feeding people nutritious food that is healing them, because everyone is sick. Every single person is sick. Everyone needs to be eating nutritious food in order to start the process of healing themselves. And we can't heal ourselves if we can't heal the land, and we won't heal the land if we don't heal ourselves, because we're the ones that have to heal the land. And so we can't do that if we're sick. Everybody's going to stay sick. And so it's got to happen together. We have to heal ourselves through the production of healthy food. And in that, we can heal the land. And so it has to be this broader community effort, because the people that are getting the nourishment and healing themselves can then help feed back and continue the process of healing the land and start the spiral upwards of healing, instead of the spiral downwards of falling into more and more sickness, which we've been doing for a very long time on the land and in our own bodies. And it's time to reverse that.
Indeed. So you talk about how unlikely you were, when you dropped yourself into your situation. And clearly, I mean, you're being a little humble, and there's some tenacity there that you probably were born with. But were there people along the way that inspired you or kind of gave you a sense of being able to do this thing that you were unfamiliar with?
Yeah, definitely. When I first came out to this area, I was actually still a PhD student, and I went out to Mark Shepard's farm. He wrote the book Restoration Agriculture. And I was like, oh, here's a guy that's doing kind of the closest that I can find to this whole savanna management things. And he's approaching at it from the tree perspective, planting hazelnuts and chestnuts more than the livestock management. So I went out there, and what struck me hanging out with Mark for a few weeks there was that he was always busy, but he was always doing something different, and he was just solving problems. And to me, it was like a light bulb went off. It's like, whoa, you can have a lifestyle where you're doing like a million things at the same time, and you're constantly like solving problems, and you're your own boss. Nobody's telling you what to do. And I was just like, whoa, that's really cool. I was really attracted to that. When we got on the land, my wife's father, my father-in-law, is a school teacher, but a sort of amateur carpenter. And he kind of has built lots of stuff, and he's really skilled at building. And he sort of was giving me confidence, saying, oh, you can do that. You can do that. Oh, it's no problem. You can do that. And so having him around to give a phone call when I was like, what do I do in this situation? I have no idea how to solve this problem, and being able to troubleshoot things like that in the construction world was super helpful and helped kind of boost my confidence. Because I never built a birdhouse when I started cutting down trees and tried to build a cabin. So I was lucky that I did that first and made a ton of mistakes building that cabin. And so then when I went to build our real house, I could avoid a lot of those mistakes.
Did you like mill all the wood and everything on site?
Yep.
Wow. That's pretty next level, man. Do you also do all the animal harvest on site and the processing and everything?
We have various relationships with processing outfits. We did work with an on-farm slaughter that was inspected, and worked with them for quite a while. And when COVID hit, we had some difficulty working with them. And so we've switched to working with a slaughterhouse that's 15 miles away, and we've developed a pretty good relationship. So we've continued to work with them. So unfortunately, at the moment, our animals are not slaughtered on the farm. We do take them to a USDA facility.
Yeah, it is one of the big challenges is finding small processing, especially mobile. That's really difficult. It's one of those things that you hope young entrepreneurial people will see some value in bringing back. It's really hard. So what are you excited about learning right now? I mean, is anything new to you? Is it all sort of in a good zone where, things just kind of move the way that they're supposed to now? Or do you feel like you're still learning, really valuable lessons every day? And if so, what are you most excited about right now?
I guess what I'm most excited about right now on the land is, for the past 10 years, I was really focusing on food production in order to build up the economic engine to make it all work. So that was, beef, pork, and chicken. And it's only in the last, we've had sheep and goats variously in the past, but we've never invested in breeding stock and actually building a flock. We would just buy, 20 lambs here and there, or, a handful of goats, and then slaughter them at the end of the year. And so now we're working on the actual breeding of sheep and goats. And so I really enjoy the process of breeding animals to be suited for your property, because the genetic stock we have access to has been variously degraded due to conventional agricultural management for the last 100 years. And so, you can start with, better or worse stock. But whatever stock you start with, unless you just happen to be really lucky and live near somebody who's done all this work for you, it's not going to be perfectly suited to your land. And so, it's going to struggle with disease and parasites. It may not grow quickly enough, or it may have various issues with its reproduction based on your soils. And so, what I have really enjoyed with cattle, and I'm looking forward to developing with the sheep and the goats, is developing genetics that are just thriving on our land. Everyone has unique land. And so finding and developing genetics that thrive on your farm, not necessarily somebody else's farm, but on your farm, I think is a really interesting and fascinating and fun process to just be involved with day to day, month to month, year to year, watching the changes, making decisions. And it's hard decisions, because if you're going to alter the genetic makeup of your population, of your herd, you have to kill animals. It's like non-negotiable. You have to cull the animals that don't belong there. And sometimes those might be the friendliest animals that you've developed a more personal relationship with. And, you have to make some difficult decisions. But the process itself, I find really fascinating and enjoyable. And I'm really excited about doing that with sheep and goats.
So, at the very beginning, you said that one of your goals was to do it, really get in and do the work and write a book about it. And I apologize for not knowing, but did you in fact write a book, or is that still in the works?
It is in the works. It's actually almost done. So I'm putting the finishing touches on it. This winter is my goal. Basically, I would have finished it about 6 years ago, because it was actually my dissertation. Like, I'd written most of it already, and then it was just massaging it to be less academic, more applicable, and then incorporate more experience that I had in the process of doing it. But I started building this house that we just moved into 7 years ago. I cut the trees down, and I told my wife, "Oh yeah, we'll be in our new house by the time our second kid is born." Well, our second kid had just turned 6 when we moved in, so my timeline was a little off. And so basically 5 years ago, I made a promise to my wife: I'm not going to do any more projects. I'm not going to start. I'm not going to finish. I'm not going to do anything until our house is done. And so it's done. So now I can get back into what was a higher priority thing for me 5 years ago, which was getting the book done. So I'm hoping to have it done this winter, spring.
Amazing. Like it will be born with your fourth baby.
That's right.
That's
yeah,
so
exactly.
exciting. Is there anything that I didn't ask that I should have asked?
It depends on which way you want to take it. I mean, I have lots of controversial opinions on things. But
is there one you're just
get
burning to
into
talk about?
controversial things, but we certainly don't have to do that.
Well, the world is full of controversial things, but if there was something that you wanted people to know that you haven't gotten to share yet, that you really wish people would know either about you or just about anything in general, what would that be?
I mean, I kind of already mentioned what I think is the biggest thing is that like we're all managing land every single day, whether we're, out there with a shovel and a post hole digger, or we're just sitting down at our table eating food. We are actively managing the land. And I was interviewed on a podcast recently, and the lady asked me, she was like, well, what's your advice for people? What can people do, besides like eating food from regenerative farms and stuff? And I had to stop because like, until we do that, nothing else matters. Until people are getting the bulk of their calories from regenerative farms, like no other activity matters. You can donate to nonprofits, you can, go take a workshop somewhere, but none of that matters at the end of the day unless we're economically supporting the farms that are doing the work. And so I really want to stress that because it's a difficult thing for a lot of people to do. It's not necessarily convenient. It's often it is and has to be more expensive. You can go to Walmart and get grass-fed beef, supposedly grass-fed beef, for $4 a pound, and it's coming from a different country. They have no regulations. They're able to feed things like gummy bears and expired candy to cows, and they can still call that grass-fed under certain countries' rules. And so there's negative externalities that those farms and those big food businesses aren't paying, right? And so somebody like me and other regenerative farmers that are internalizing all of the cost to society so that we don't have those costs to society. We're not polluting the groundwater. We're actually cleaning the groundwater. We're not degrading the soil. We're actually building the soil. Like you just have to pay for those things because you're going to pay one way or another, whether it's through, poor health and having to pay for all kinds of medical procedures because of poor health from eating poorly. Society pays for these things one way or another. And the best way to pay for it is to pay the people who are doing the right thing and not expect society to pay the costs of the poor production of the other people doing it the more industrial way. And so it really is important for everybody, to the best of their ability, to eat as locally as possible, and as from people that are doing the best kind of whether it's grass-fed, regenerative, pasture-based. I mean, there's lots of different catchphrases and words, but I really encourage people to get out there and meet the farmers and to see the farm. I mean, that's what I always say. People ask if we're certified organics. No, absolutely not. I mean, the organic standards are laughable. We're so far beyond organic standards, it is practically meaningless. And the other thing is, well, we're not on store shelves where we need to have a little circle that says organic in order to be competitive. But we have sort of an open policy. You can come see our cows. Like I don't need some third party to come inspect me. You can come inspect me anytime. And so finding farms that are operating at a higher level than organic is really, really, really important. And buying as much food as you can, whether they're, it's no-till vegetable farms or grass-fed beef producers or grass-fed dairy, is a really, powerful,
really
both
powerful.
healing food, both for our bodies and for the land. And so it's the most important thing. Anything else that we can do is secondary to the primary thing, which is eating as much of our calories as possible from local, regenerative, sustainable, however you want to describe it, but from real people growing real food in ways that are building soil and healing the land.
Well, I think that's a great way to play it out because, I think if anyone has any spare time to give anymore, it should be spent on figuring out where your food is really coming from because it is really challenging. I mean, the labels are not helpful, as you say, and it really matters to do the work to find the food that's going to nourish you and the people who are doing that work with love and intention. So thank you for having that be the note that we end on. Peter, it's been really, really wonderful speaking with you. How do people find you if they want to interact with you and your products or maybe your workshops or whatever?
Sure. Mastodon Valley Farm is our website. That's where you can find out more about our farm, how we operate, and you can also purchase meat. That's one thing we try to do is make it buying from farms is often really confusing. So we try to make it kind of straightforward, and with a few clicks, you can kind of get meat delivered to your door. So that's MastodonValleyFarm.com. And then we have MastodonValleyFarmSchool.com, where we have all of our courses and consulting and things like that. We have a free course on regenerative land design. And then we also have some more paid, longer, intensive courses. And we'll be doing a few in-person events here this next 2025 year.
Awesome. Well, good luck with everything. Very happy for you and your family to be not only in your new house for the fourth baby and the new book and everything, but thank you for everything that you're doing and for how you're showing up with not just the food, but also the education. I think that's it's a lot to take on. So I'm glad you're out there doing that. And I hope we meet in person someday.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Peter. Notes on keystoning. Even in his later years, Thomas Jefferson obsessed over the idea of elusive megafauna roaming the interiors of the American continent as colonial expansion forced its way west. He was not at all convinced that they weren't still out there. And in his book, Notes on the State of Virginia, in many ways a rebuke to all of those European haters, he says, "It may be asked, why do I insert the mammoth as if it still existed? I ask in return, why should I omit it as if it did not exist? The North and West still remain in their aboriginal state, unexplored and undisturbed by us or by others for us. He may as well exist there now as he did formerly, where we find his bones." Now, whatever we may think of Thomas Jefferson and his musings on American ecology, who knows? I rather like to imagine that some giant beast or some giant beasts are going to finally come out of hiding and take us to school. But until then, let's try to think like mastodons.
All right. We hope you enjoyed that episode. Always make sure to check the links in the show notes for how to follow our guests and hosts. The No-Till Market Garden podcast is a free show that is supported by folks like you who contribute every month over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. That support helps ensure all the shows we do, from the Seed Farmer podcast to the Winter Growers podcast, the Collaborative Farming podcast, the Composter podcast, Growers Daily, and of course, the No-Till Market Garden podcast, can continue to go and grow. You can also find books and hats as well as an active forum over at no-tillgrowers.com. Huge thank you to editor Michael Sellis and producer Jackson Roulette for all their work on this show and the rest of the team over at no-tillgrowers.com. Otherwise, thank you all for listening, and make sure you are subscribed wherever you're hearing this so you don't miss the next episode of the No-Till Market Garden podcast. See you then.